She stepped off the bus, her small bag slung over one shoulder, and looked up at the tall, elegant buildings of the conservatory. For a moment, she just stood there, taking it all in. The marble steps, the shining windows, the ornate doors, it all seemed so grand, so intimidating. She had never been anywhere like this before. Back home, the streets were narrow and crowded, the buildings worn and cracked. Music had been a private world for her, hidden in a small corner of her house where the old upright piano sat, scratched and faded, yet alive with the songs she played. Here, everything was polished, perfect, and intimidating. But still, she walked forward, her steps careful, not wanting to seem out of place. Inside, the hallways were wide and echoed with the sound of footsteps and distant music. Students rushed past her in a flurry of energy, their elegant clothes and polished shoes, making her feel even more out of place. They carried their sheet music in bags with a certain confidence, chatting easily with each other as though they belonged. She moved quietly, almost invisible, letting the noise of the place wash over her. She had come for one reason, and that reason was not to impress anyone. She had come to play. She had heard stories about the conservatory, that it was filled with the best teachers, the most talented students, and a level of skill that few could reach, that it could break some and make others shine. She was not naive. She knew the standards would be high. She knew many would laugh at her simplicity, her lack of expensive lessons, her modest background. But she also knew that music was not about money or titles or appearance. Music was about heart. Music was about the hours spent alone, learning the feel of each note, the emotion hidden in each melody. That was her world, and she belonged there as much as anyone. The first teacher she met looked her up and down and raised an eyebrow. He was a tall man, dressed in a suit that spoke of years of prestige, his hair perfectly combed back. "You're here for the auditions?" he asked, his voice polite, but with a hint of doubt. She nodded. "Yes, sir." He looked at her bag, then back at her, his expression unreadable. "You know this is a serious place. Only serious students are accepted." She nodded again, a small smile tugging at her lips. "I understand." He didn't respond, only motioned toward the audition room. The room was large, with a grand piano in the center. Chairs were arranged along the sides for the teachers to sit and watch. She stepped forward slowly, her fingers brushing the keys lightly as if testing the air. She didn't rush. She didn't feel the need to impress. She only felt the music inside her waiting to be released. The teachers watched, their eyes sharp, their expressions skeptical. She was just a simple woman after all. How could someone like her possibly stand up to their standards? Around her, other students prepared their own auditions. Some whispered to each other, comparing pieces they would play, boasting of hours spent with private teachers. She listened quietly, noting nothing in judgment, only curiosity. She had never been competitive. She had never wanted to prove herself to anyone but herself. Yet there was a quiet excitement in her chest, a thrill at being here among so much talent, even if they did not notice her yet. When it was her turn to play, she took a deep breath and sat at the piano. The keys felt familiar under her fingers, even in this grand, unfamiliar hall. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the music inside her settle. Then she began. The first notes were soft, tentative, as if testing the room. But with each passing second, her confidence grew, and the melody became fuller, richer. It was not perfect, not technically flawless, but it was alive. It carried the years of practice in quiet corners, the moments of joy, the moments of struggle, the nights spent playing while the world outside slept. The teachers exchanged glances, some frowning, some leaning forward, curious despite themselves. There was something unusual about her playing. It was simple, yet it spoke. It was humble, yet it demanded attention. One of the teachers, a woman known for her strict criticism, frowned deeply. "She will not last a day here," she whispered under her breath. But even as she spoke, her eyes did not leave the keys. There was a feeling in the room, subtle but unmistakable, that something unexpected was happening. When she finished, she didn't rush to stand or bow. She simply lifted her hands from the keys and let the last note hang in the air. Silence followed, heavy and still. The teachers didn't speak at once, and she didn't mind. She had done what she came to do. She had played with honesty, with heart, with everything she had. That was enough for her. One teacher finally cleared his throat. "Interesting," he said, his voice cautious. "You have potential, but you will need guidance, discipline. This is not a place for simple practice. You must dedicate yourself completely." She nodded, her eyes steady. "I am ready," she said softly. She didn't explain her years of solitary practice, the countless hours spent perfecting melodies. In an old, broken-down piano, she didn't need to. Her music spoke for itself. The other students watched her curiously now. Some were impressed, some confused, and some clearly annoyed. They had expected someone ordinary, someone they could overlook. Instead, she had quietly drawn all attention without a word, simply by being herself and letting the music flow. It was a small victory, unnoticed by most, but it filled her with quiet satisfaction. As she left the room, another student approached. Her, a young man with expensive-looking clothes and a confident smile. "That was different," he said. "I've never heard anyone play like that." She smiled gently. "Thank you. I just play the way I feel." He frowned slightly, as though trying to understand. She didn't explain further. Words were never enough to convey what music could. Walking through the halls, she felt both out of place and oddly at home. The conservatory was intimidating, yes, but it also had a strange warmth. It was a place where music mattered more than appearances, where talent and dedication could shine, even if it came from unexpected places. She knew the road ahead would not be easy. The teachers would test her, the students would doubt her, and the challenges would be many. But she also knew that if she remained true to herself and her music, she could face whatever came her way. That night, in her small dormitory room, she sat by the window and practiced quietly. The notes floated through the air, soft and persistent, a reminder of why she had come. Outside, the city was alive with lights and movement, but inside, she had her own world, her own music. She played until her fingers ached, until her mind was at peace, until the simple act of touching the keys became a conversation with her soul. She thought of the teachers, the students, the doubts she had seen in their eyes. Let them doubt. She didn't play for their approval. She played for herself, for the music that had carried her this far, for the joy and comfort it had given her in every lonely corner of her life. She knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges, new tests, and perhaps new ridicule. But she also knew that she would face them with the same calm determination she had always carried. And somewhere deep inside, she felt a small spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this place could see her not as a simple woman, but as someone capable of extraordinary things. And she was ready to let that possibility grow, one note at a time. The next morning, she woke early, as she always did. The sunlight filtered through the tall dormitory windows, casting long shadows across the floor. She could hear the faint hum of activity outside, the footsteps of students hurrying, the occasional laughter, the soft echo of someone practicing in a nearby room. She dressed quickly, choosing the simplest outfit she owned, one that was clean and neat but not flashy. She didn't care about appearances. She cared about music and about proving to herself, quietly, that she belonged here. Breakfast in the dining hall was a mix of chatter and clinking cutlery. She sat alone at a small table, observing. Students around her spoke of the upcoming auditions, of the pieces they were preparing, and of the teacher's expectations. She listened carefully, noting who seemed confident, who seemed anxious, and who seemed eager to shine. She did not join in the conversation. She had no need to boast or to compare herself. Her music, she believed, would speak when the time came. By mid-morning, a notice was posted on the board outside the main hall. Every student would be required to perform a particularly difficult piece by the end of the week. It was a piece that had tested even the most advanced pianists, full of rapid scales, sudden shifts in tempo, and passages that demanded both strength and delicacy. She read the notice twice, letting the words sink in. Many students around her groaned audibly, while others whispered anxiously. Some even exchanged worried glances, clearly unsure if they could manage the challenge. She felt a familiar flutter in her chest. Excitement, yes, but also determination. This was not an opportunity to show off. It was a test of heart, patience, and persistence. She had faced difficult pieces before, alone in her small room at home, without applause or guidance, learning only from her mistakes and her love for the music. The challenge did not intimidate her. It invited her. The teachers, of course, made no secret of their skepticism. The head teacher, known for his exacting standards and sharp tongue, gathered the students in the main hall. His eyes scanned the room like a hawk, stopping briefly on her. There was a faint raising of an eyebrow, a subtle gesture of curiosity mixed with doubt. He began speaking, his voice firm. This piece is not for the faint of heart. It requires discipline, skill, and control beyond what most students possess. Some of you may fail, and some of you may surprise us. Let us see who's ready for the true demands of music. Murmurs spread through the room. Some students looked down, others exchanged nervous glances, and a few tried to maintain an air of confidence. She listened quietly, absorbing every word. She did not feel fear. She did not feel pressure. She only felt the music waiting in her fingers, ready to be shaped into sound. After the announcement, students scattered to their practice rooms, some running off with sheet music in hand, others muttering complaints or encouragements to each other. She walked slowly, deliberately, carrying only her small notebook and a pencil. She had written her own notes about the piece, breaking down difficult passages, marking where she needed to pay special attention. She did not need anyone to guide her. She needed only to focus. Her practice room was small but quiet, with a single upright piano that had seen better days. The keys were slightly uneven, and the wood was scratched in places, but it was familiar and forgiving, as if it understood her hands. She sat down and opened the music, letting her eyes trace the notes. At first, she played slowly, carefully. She did not rush, and she did not try to impress. Each note had to be understood, felt, and then played. Mistakes were made, of course, but she did not allow them to discourage her. She paused, repeated passages, and adjusted her timing. Hours passed like this, quietly and almost unnoticed. She became immersed in the music, her mind entirely focused on the rhythm, the dynamics, the emotions embedded in each phrase. Outside, the world moved on. Students went in and out, some practicing loudly, some arguing with teachers, some laughing and gossiping. She barely noticed them. She was in her own world, a world of sound, feeling, and dedication. By late afternoon, one of the teachers came into the room unexpectedly. He was tall and stern, known for his harsh criticisms and exacting expectations. He watched her play for several minutes without comment. She did not look up, did not falter, continued with her slow, deliberate practice. After a while, he spoke, his voice low but firm. "You play with sincerity. But this piece is far beyond what you have attempted publicly. Are you ready to face the scrutiny of the hall?" She paused for a moment, her fingers resting lightly on the keys. "I am," she said simply. She did not need to explain herself. Her music, her practice, and her calm determination said more than words ever could. The teacher studied her for a moment longer, then nodded once and left. She let out a small breath, returning to her music, feeling a mix of relief and quiet anticipation. The days that followed were intense. Each morning, she woke early to practice before breakfast. Each afternoon, she returned to the hall to observe other students. She noticed the way they played for attention, trying to show skill rather than understanding. She noticed the teacher's reactions, the approving nods, the frowns, the whispered advice. She did not judge. She absorbed it all, learning from both the successes and the mistakes around her. Sometimes students mocked her behind her back. "She looks like she doesn't belong here," one whispered. "I bet she can't even handle the first page of the piece." Others laughed. Some even dared to offer advice that was condescending rather than helpful. She never responded. She kept walking with quiet confidence, never letting their words touch her focus. Inside, she felt a sense of calm strength. Let them doubt. They did not know her history, the years of practice, the nights spent in silence, learning to hear music in her soul. One afternoon, as she was practicing a particularly difficult passage, she felt a surge of frustration. Her fingers stumbled, repeatedly refusing to obey her commands. She stopped and leaned back on the bench, closing her eyes. She remembered the early mornings at home, the hours spent alone, the moments when her hands ached, but her heart wanted to keep going. Slowly, she returned to the keys, starting again, carefully shaping each note. By the end of the hour, she played the passage smoothly, each note clear and deliberate. The feeling of quiet triumph filled her chest. She smiled, knowing that progress, even small, mattered more than praise. Word of her diligence began to spread among the students. Some were curious, others still skeptical. A few approached her cautiously, asking questions about her technique, her practice habits, her approach to music. She answered simply, sharing what she had learned through years of patient study. Observation. She did not boast, and she did not minimize her efforts. She spoke honestly about listening, about feeling the music, about learning from mistakes. Slowly, respect began to grow, even if quietly. The teachers, meanwhile, watched her from a distance. They saw her commitment, the way she approached the piece with patience and care, the way she refused to rush or show off. Some were impressed, though none spoke openly. They had underestimated her, as they underestimated many who did not conform to their ideas of talent. But there was a growing sense of curiosity, a subtle question forming in their minds. Could someone so simple, so unassuming, really master such a difficult piece? By the end of the week, the day of the performance arrived. The air in the conservatory was thick with tension. Students hurried to their rooms, checking notes, rehearsing passages, adjusting their clothing. Some paced nervously, muttering to themselves. Some looked confident, almost arrogant, sure that they would succeed. She moved slowly, deliberately, carrying only her small notebook, her hands steady, her mind calm. She did not feel fear. She did not feel pressure. She only felt the music waiting, ready to speak. Before she entered the hall, one of the older students stopped her. "Are you really going to play that piece? Do you know how difficult it is?" he asked, a hint of disbelief in his voice. She smiled gently. "I know it is difficult, but I am ready." He shook his head, unable to understand how someone so quiet and simple could have such confidence. She nodded politely and walked past him, her heart steady, her mind focused, her hands already imagining the keys beneath her fingers' dot. As she stepped into the hall, she felt the weight of the room. The teachers sat in their seats, their eyes sharp, their expressions unreadable. The students watched eagerly, some whispering, some staring with anticipation, some rolling their eyes in doubt. She did not flinch. She walked to the piano, her bag placed carefully aside. She touched the keys lightly, as if greeting old friends, and closed her eyes for a moment. The world outside faded. There was only her and the music. When her hands began to move, the first notes were soft, deliberate, cautious. But as she continued, her confidence grew. She felt the rhythm, the flow, the emotion behind each phrase. The difficult passages that had frustrated her now became a conversation between her fingers and the keys. She played not to impress, not to prove, but to express, to let the music speak through her. The hall fell silent, the whispers dying as the teachers and students alike were drawn into the sound. And in that silence, something remarkable began to happen. Those who had doubted her, who had laughed at her simplicity, began to listen with genuine attention. They noticed the care, the precision, the heart in each note. The hall was heavy with expectation. Every eye seemed to follow her as she moved toward the grand piano, her small bag set aside, her hands brushing lightly over the smooth black and white keys. A few students exchanged quiet snickers, whispering, comments meant to undermine her. "She won't even make it past the first few measures," one said, shaking his head. Another smirked, as if imagining the inevitable failure. Even some of the teachers raised subtle eyebrows, doubt flickering across their faces. She didn't respond. She never had, not to whispers, not to laughter, not to disbelief. She simply sat down and closed her eyes for a moment. The room faded. The students, the teachers, the grand walls, they all vanished in her mind. There was only her hands, and the music that had lived inside her for so long. Her fingers hovered over the keys, feeling their texture, the faint chill of the polished surface beneath her skin. The first notes were soft, tentative, almost fragile. The skeptics in the hall leaned back, expecting the stumble, the wrong note, the awkward pause that would reveal her lack of skill. She had anticipated this reaction, yet she did not let it touch her. She played the notes as she had imagined them in her mind countless times. Each one held a purpose. Each one carried meaning. Even in their simplicity, they began to draw this attention of the listeners. A few students shifted uncomfortably. They had expected ridicule, not the subtle, steady grace that was emerging. The head teacher, who had been so confident that she would falter, leaned slightly forward in his seat. His fingers tapped against his notebook as he observed her, almost involuntarily. Something about the way she approached the piece, so carefully and so sincerely, seemed to defy his assumptions. By the time she reached the more difficult passages, where other students had faltered in rehearsal, a subtle change occurred in the room. The whispers stopped. The laughter died. Even the most arrogant of students found themselves holding their breath, unsure how to react. Her fingers moved with precision, her wrists bending gracefully to meet the demands of the music. There was a rhythm to her approach, a steady calm, that seemed impossible given the complexity of the piece. One of the teachers, known for her exacting standards and sharp criticisms, frowned deeply. She had been watching from the side, certain that the performance would collapse at any moment. But it did not. Each note rang true. Each phrase flowed into the next with elegance and understanding. She leaned forward slightly, her frown still, present, but now tinged with a reluctant curiosity. There was something in the way the woman played that went beyond technique. It was the emotion, the feeling, the depth behind each note that seemed to speak directly to the soul. A few students exchanged glances, their earlier confidence beginning to falter. They had mocked her simplicity, her quiet demeanor, and now they felt a sting of doubt. How could someone so unassuming play with such skill and heart? How could someone who had seemed so ordinary command the attention of the entire hall with just a piano in her hands? The room had grown still, not with fear, but with anticipation. Every note was magnified, every pause pregnant with meaning. She moved through the middle section, the notes cascading in rapid succession, demanding control and focus. Her hands did not falter. Her fingers hit the keys with strength and precision, yet with a softness that preserved the emotion within the music. It was a delicate balance, one that many seasoned players struggled to maintain. And yet she did it effortlessly, as if the music had always been a part of her body, a part of her soul. The snickering that had started at the beginning of the piece was now gone. Even those who had intended to mock her found themselves silent, their expressions shifting from amusement to astonishment. A quiet murmur rippled through the audience, but no one dared speak above a whisper. The head teacher leaned back in his chair, his hand resting against his chin. He could not deny what he was hearing. He could not deny the skill, the emotion, the sincerity in her performance. As she entered the final passages, the complexity intensified. Notes flew in patterns that seemed impossible to follow, yet she navigated them with grace. Her body moved subtly with the rhythm, her head nodding slightly, her eyes occasionally flicking to the music and back to the keys. It was as if she were having a conversation with the piano, asking questions, receiving answers, and shaping the sound with every gesture. Those listening began to notice the way she commanded the space, not with arrogance, but with quiet authority. Her performance was not about speed or flash. It was about understanding. Each note had purpose. Each chord had weight. She lingered on the pauses, drawing attention to the spaces between sounds where emotion often hid. She emphasized the crescendos and decrescendos naturally, without exaggeration, letting the music speak on its own. The hall, once filled with doubts and mockery, was now captivated. Eyes were wide, lips parted, and hearts beating a little faster, drawn into the music as if by an invisible thread. One of the older students, who had spent years trying to impress teachers with technical displays, felt a knot of jealousy mixed with admiration. He had studied for months, perfecting every detail, yet he could not create the depth that this woman conveyed with such simplicity. He tried to remember the lessons he had learned, the hours of practice he had endured, but they seemed hollow. Compared to the sincerity of what he was witnessing, the teacher's expressions were changing too. Skepticism was giving way to astonishment, disbelief to respect. The woman in front of the piano, who had seemed so ordinary and unassuming, had begun to defy every expectation. She had not only played the difficult piece, she had made it her own. She had imbued it with a quality that could not be taught in any classroom, a quality that came from years of quiet dedication, from a life spent listening, feeling, and understanding. Music deeply by the time she reached the final notes. Her hands moved with a confident fluidity. The music swelled, then softened, and ended with a delicate touch that left the hall suspended in silence. The last note lingered, hanging in the air like a question waiting for an answer. She sat back, her fingers resting lightly on the keys, her breathing steady, her face calm. She had given everything she had, and she knew it. For a long moment there was no sound, no movement, no reaction. The teachers blinked, the students stared, and the echoes of the music seemed to fill every corner of the hall. Then slowly, one of the younger students let out a small gasp, which was quickly followed by a murmur of admiration. Others began to clap hesitantly, as if unsure whether it was allowed. The teachers exchanged glances, and then the clapping grew louder, more confident, until the hall was filled with applause. Even those who had doubted her could not deny what they had seen. She had taken something impossible and made it beautiful. She had taken skepticism and turned it into wonder. The mockery, the whispers, the laughter, they all seemed irrelevant now, swept away by the power of her performance. She stood, bowing slightly, her face serene, her eyes calm. She did not seek praise, but she accepted it with grace, knowing that she had earned it through her own dedication and love for music. After she stepped away from the piano, one of the teachers approached cautiously. His usual sharp expression was softened by something like awe. "That was extraordinary," he said, his voice low, almost reverent. "I did not expect that level of control, of feeling. You have a rare gift." She nodded simply, offering a quiet smile. "Thank you. I only play what I feel." The students, who had been ready to laugh at her, now looked at her with a mix of admiration and disbelief. Some whispered among themselves, trying to understand what had just happened. "Did you see that?" one asked. "She played it perfectly, and she made it sound so alive." Another nodded, still wide-eyed. "I can't believe it. I thought she'd fail in the first few bars." Even the head teacher, who rarely showed emotion, leaned forward, studying her closely. He did not speak, but his eyes followed her as she gathered her bag and walked from the hall. There was a quiet acknowledgment in his gaze, a recognition that this woman, who had seemed so simple, had accomplished something remarkable. Outside the hall, students approached her cautiously. Some offered congratulations, others just stared in awe. She accepted the praise with humility, nodding, smiling softly, but she did not linger. She felt no need for validation from others. The music had been enough. The satisfaction of having given her best, of having faced doubt and come through with honesty, was reward enough for her. Walking down the wide corridors of the conservatory, she felt a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. Her hands tingled from the effort, her heart beat a little faster from the thrill, but her mind was calm. She had faced the challenge, and she had risen to it. She had shown that skill, heart, and perseverance could overcome doubt and expectation. And she knew that this was only the beginning. She passed groups of students still buzzing about her performance, hearing fragments of conversation that ranged from disbelief to admiration. "I never thought she could do it. She made it look easy. I've never heard anyone play like that." She did not stop to reply. She only moved forward, feeling the quiet confidence that had always been part of her. She had not changed, except in the eyes of those around her. They had seen what she could do, but she had always known it herself, that evening in her small dew. The next morning brought a quiet excitement that she could feel even before leaving her dormitory. The memory of yesterday's performance lingered like a soft echo in her mind, but she knew today would be different. Today, the full attention of the conservatory was focused on the challenge ahead. The teachers were already murmuring among themselves, whispering about her unexpected skill, the way she had navigated the complex piece without hesitation, and the emotion she had poured into every note. She moved through the halls with her usual calm. Students noticed her, some with curiosity, others with lingering doubt. "Do you think she can do it again?" One student asked a friend, a note of nervous admiration in their voice. Another shook their head, clearly struggling to reconcile their expectations with what they had witnessed. For her part, she did not respond. She did not need to. Her mind was already on the music, on the challenges waiting in the grand hall. By mid-morning, the teachers had arranged the room for another session. This time, it was more formal, with the anticipation of every teacher, student, and observer focused entirely on her. The grand piano gleamed under the soft morning light, the polished surface reflecting her calm image back at her. She approached it slowly, placing her hands gently on the keys. She took a deep breath, closing her eyes for a moment, letting the hall dissolve around her. She was ready. The first notes rang out softly, almost whispering, fragile yet deliberate. A few students had whispered remarks before she began, expecting her to falter or stumble under the scrutiny. The first few bars disproved their assumptions immediately. The hall grew quiet, so quiet that even the smallest sound, the soft scraping of a foot, the gentle rustle of a page turning, seemed amplified. She did not play to impress, but the effect was immediate. All eyes and ears turned toward her, drawn in by the purity and focus of her music. The teachers leaned forward in their seats, their expressions a mixture of skepticism and curiosity. She could sense the unspoken challenge in the room. They had expected her to fail, to provide an easy spectacle of incompetence. Instead, she played with precision and calm, a fluidity that made even the most complicated sections seem natural. She navigated the passages that had caused others to stumble, allowing her fingers to flow over the keys with a balance of strength and delicacy. A faint murmur spread through the students, an almost involuntary acknowledgement of her skill. Some of the previously confident performers glanced nervously at each other, unsure how to react. They had believed themselves superior, experienced, and untouchable in their skill. Now they could not deny the truth unfolding before them. She was extraordinary, not because she flaunted her talent, but because she let it emerge naturally, without effort or self-consciousness. As the music grew more complex, the notes speeding and intertwining in intricate patterns, she did not falter. Her hands moved with a rhythm that seemed born of instinct, yet guided by years of quiet study. She breathed in harmony with the music, each exhale shaping the next phrase. The teachers, often harsh critics who were quick to point out flaws, were now silent, their eyes widening with astonishment. They had expected failure, but what they witnessed was mastery. Not only technical mastery, but emotional truth conveyed through every chord. One teacher, known for her blunt assessments and high standards, had been frowning since the first note. Yet even she could not hide the flicker of admiration that now crossed her face. She leaned forward slightly, her eyes fixed on the keys, watching the subtle movements of the woman's wrists, the delicate placement of her fingers. Every note carried meaning, every pause had intention. The music seemed to speak directly to the listener's soul, bypassing intellect and connecting purely with emotion. The students' earlier laughter and whispers had vanished entirely. Even those who had hoped for a spectacle of incompetence were now captivated, unable to look away. Some had never experienced such a performance, where technical skill and heartfelt expression merged so seamlessly. They watched in awe as she transformed the difficult piece, taking what many would have seen as a mechanical challenge and turning it into a living, breathing story told through sound. Her hands flew across the keys in some passages, navigating rapid scales and jumps with apparent ease. Yet in the slower, more contemplative sections, she allowed the music to linger, letting each note resonate fully before moving on. She did not rush. She did not force. She let the natural rhythm of the piece guide her, shaping it with both her intellect and her heart. Those listening could feel the difference immediately. This was not performance for the sake of recognition. This was music as it was meant to be, alive, vulnerable, and deeply human. Some students began whispering to each other, almost in disbelief. She's incredible," one murmured. Another shook their head, still trying to understand what they were hearing. "I've studied that piece for months, and she's doing it better than I ever could." Even those who had once sneered at her simplicity found themselves unable to think unkind thoughts. The music demanded respect, commanded attention, and left no room for mockery. The crescendo approached, the part of the piece that required the greatest control, the perfect balance between speed, accuracy, and feeling. Her fingers did not hesitate. She felt the music in her bones, letting it flow naturally through her hands. Each chord was precise, each passage executed with clarity and emotion. The hall seemed to hold its breath. Even the teachers, who had seen countless students perform the same piece, were captivated by the beauty and precision she achieved effortlessly. A particularly difficult section arrived, one that had reduced many skilled pianists to fumbling mistakes. Her hands, guided by both instinct and experience, navigated it flawlessly. She did not rely on force or speed alone. She relied on understanding. She knew the piece intimately, not as notes on a page, but as a living, breathing creation. Every subtle shift in tone, every pause, every variation in tempo, spoke of her connection to the music, a connection that no doubt, no expectation, and no mockery could ever shake. The silence in the hall was profound. There was no rustling of papers, no shifting of feet, no whispering of students. All attention was on her, on the flow of her fingers, on the way the music seemed to reach out and touch the listener's emotions directly. Some of the younger students felt tears prickling their eyes, overwhelmed by the beauty of the performance. Others were simply transfixed, unable to comprehend how someone so unassuming could create such a commanding presence through music alone. The final notes approached, delicate and deliberate. She did not rush them. She allowed them to resonate fully, letting the sound fade naturally into the silence of the hall. When the last note hung in the air, a few seconds of stillness followed a collective intake of breath, as if the room itself needed a moment to process what had just occurred. Then, slowly, one of the students clapped, a small, tentative sound. It was followed by another and another, until the hall erupted in a wave of applause and admiration. The teachers, too, were moved. Some stood, some leaned forward, all watching, with newfound respect. They had been ready to dismiss her, ready to mock her simplicity, but now they could not deny what they had witnessed. She had transcended their expectations, not through arrogance or showmanship, but through the quiet strength of her talent and the depth of her feeling. She rose from the piano, bowing lightly, her expression serene. There was no trace of triumph or arrogance in her demeanor, only calm satisfaction. She had given everything she had to the music, and the music had responded in kind. She stepped away from the piano slowly, allowing the audience to take in the impact of her performance. Students approached cautiously, hesitant at first, unsure whether to speak or simply watch in awe. Some congratulated her, their voices full of genuine admiration. Others remained silent, still processing the experience. She smiled politely at each, offering a nod or a quiet word of thanks. She did not need accolades, but she accepted their respect with humility, recognizing that the impact of her performance was more important than any praise. The teachers conferred quietly among themselves, their expressions revealing a mixture of disbelief and respect. The head teacher, who rarely showed emotion, finally spoke, his voice calm but firm. That was extraordinary. Few have ever performed that piece with such clarity, precision, and feeling. You have a rare gift, one that demands recognition and guidance. She nodded softly, a small smile tugging at her lips. Thank you. I only play what I feel. Later, when the hall had emptied, she sat alone for a while, letting the echo of the music linger in the space. She did not dwell on the reactions, the applause, or the astonishment. She only focused on the quiet satisfaction of having done her best, of having expressed what she needed to express. The music had been her voice, and it had spoken clearly. That evening, back in her dormitory room, she played quietly on the upright piano she had grown up with. The grand piano had been magnificent, commanding and intimidating, yet she had faced it with calm determination. Here, in her familiar space, the notes felt comforting, a reminder of the quiet dedication that had brought her this far. She played, slowly, deliberately, savoring each chord, each pause, each subtle shift in tempo, reflecting on the day's events. As she finished, she sat back and let the final know. The day after her performance began quietly. The conservatory, usually buzzing with energy, seemed subdued, almost contemplative. Students walked through the halls with whispers trailing behind them. Teachers were in discussion, their expressions serious, their voices low. The music she had played the previous day had left a mark, a subtle ripple that no one could ignore. Even those who had once doubted her abilities now carried a quiet curiosity, a need to understand the woman who had stunned the entire conservatory. She walked through the corridors carrying her small bag, her fingers brushing lightly along the railing. She had learned long ago that appearances and rumors mattered little. What mattered was her music and her focus. She had seen the looks of surprise, the skeptical glances, the grudging respect in the eyes of teachers, and she felt neither pride nor discomfort. She simply kept walking, calm and steady, her mind already thinking of the next piece, the next challenge, the next lesson in understanding the piano and herself. In the morning meeting, the head teacher addressed the students and faculty. His voice was firm, carrying authority, yet there was a rare softness beneath it. Yesterday's performance, he began, pausing as his eyes swept the room, was unexpected, extraordinary, and a lesson to all of us. Talent is not always obvious at first glance. Dedication and sincerity can reveal abilities we might never anticipate. I believe we can all learn from this example. The students exchanged glances, their whispers hushed in awe, and the teachers nodded, some silently acknowledging their prior misjudgments. She sat quietly at the back of the room, her hands folded in her lap. She did not seek recognition. She did not need praise. But hearing the acknowledgement from the head teacher stirred something deep inside her. It was not vanity. It was a quiet validation of years of effort, of the countless hours she had spent alone with a piano that few others had touched, learning not for applause, but for understanding. After the meeting, several students approached her. Some hesitated, unsure how to speak to the woman who had defied every expectation. Others were braver, asking questions about her practice, her approach to the piece, her methods of learning. She answered patiently, speaking softly, with humility and clarity. She did not boast. She did not need to. She spoke honestly about the hours of focused study, about the patience required to understand the music fully, and about listening, not just to the notes, but to the emotion and life behind them. One student, a young woman with a confident smile but a nervous voice, asked, "How did you know what to do with the piece?" Even the teachers struggle with some sections. She smiled gently. I listened. I practiced slowly, and I let the music guide me. Every note has meaning, and the more you understand it, the more it speaks to you. The student nodded, absorbing the advice, clearly inspired. Others leaned in, listening intently, realizing that mastery was more than technical skill. It was understanding, feeling, and patience. The teachers, observing from a distance, began to approach her. The woman who had been so critical before spoke first. "I must admit, I underestimated you," she said, her voice soft but sincere. "You have a gift not only for technique, but for expression. You make the music breathe." She did not mock or question her simplicity. She spoke with admiration. The woman nodded, accepting the words with quiet dignity. "Thank you. I only do what the music asks of me." The head teacher stepped forward. "Your performance was more than remarkable," he said. "I have seen countless students struggle with this piece, yet you approached it with confidence and understanding. It is rare to encounter someone with both skill and humility. I hope you will continue to challenge yourself here." She bowed her head slightly. "I will. I want to learn and grow." Her words were simple, but there was an intensity behind them, a determination that went beyond appearances. Word of her talent spread quickly throughout the conservatory. Students who had once whispered and doubted now sought to observe her practice. Sessions, hoping to understand the source of her skill. Teachers, too, began to offer guidance, not because they doubted her ability, but because they recognized her potential and wanted to nurture it. Slowly, the walls of skepticism and mockery that had surrounded her began to crumble. What remained was respect, admiration, and a quiet fascination with her abilities. During one afternoon session, she was asked to demonstrate a passage of the piece to a group of students struggling with it. She approached the piano, her movements calm and deliberate. She played the section slowly at first, explaining her technique and thought process as she went. She emphasized patience, listening, and the importance of understanding the music beyond the notes. The students watched closely, taking in every detail. For many, it was a revelation. They realized that talent alone was not enough. Understanding and feeling the music were equally important. As the day went on, she noticed a subtle change in the atmosphere. Students who had been dismissive or indifferent now nodded when she entered a room. Teachers who had doubted her abilities sought her opinion on technical matters. She did not flaunt this shift. She did not seek to assert herself. She simply continued to play, to practice, and to share her knowledge quietly, letting her actions speak louder than any words could. By evening, she returned to her dormitory room, her hands tired, but her spirit calm. She sat at the familiar upright piano, letting her fingers glide across the keys. The notes filled the room, soft and deliberate, reflecting her thoughts and emotions. She thought about the events of the past days, the surprise and admiration she had encountered, and the ways in which her life at the conservatory was beginning to change. She did not think of herself as superior to anyone else. She did not feel pride in the conventional sense. What she felt was a quiet confidence, the knowledge that dedication and sincerity could overcome doubt and misunderstanding. She had proven not to others, but to herself, that her path, though unconventional and solitary, was valid and capable of extraordinary results. Late at night, when the dormitory was silent, she played a simple melody she had composed herself years ago. It was not complex or difficult, but it carried the emotions she had felt in her journey, the loneliness, the hope, the quiet determination that had guided her all her life. She played slowly, savoring each note, letting the music reflect her inner world. The melody filled the small room, a private celebration of what she had achieved and what was still to come. The next morning, the conservatory seemed brighter, almost as if it had been touched by the echoes of her music. Students greeted her with cautious smiles. Teachers nodded with genuine respect, and even those who had once mocked her gave a polite word of acknowledgement. She accepted it all quietly, never seeking more than what the music itself could provide. One of the teachers approached her privately. "I must ask," he said, his tone careful, "how you develop such control and expression. You have not only technique, but a way of making the music speak." She looked at him, her eyes calm. "I listened. I practiced. I allowed the music to teach me rather than trying to impose myself on it." He nodded slowly, as if understanding the depth of her statement. It is rare to see someone approach music with such patience and honesty. "You are a lesson to all of us." Her days continued in much the same way, filled with practice, observation, and quiet teaching. She learned from every interaction, from every performance she watched, from every piece she played. She was no longer the simple woman who had arrived with nothing but a bag and determination. She had become someone whose presence demanded attention, not through arrogance or performance, but through the authenticity of her talent and her dedication. She noticed the subtle ways in which her influence began to spread. Students who had once been self-focused now practiced with more care, paying attention to phrasing and emotion rather than just speed. Teachers began to consider alternative methods of instruction, inspired by her approach to understanding music. Even the atmosphere of the conservatory felt lighter, more open, as though her quiet dedication had reminded everyone that true mastery was about more than appearances and technical skill. It was about heart, understanding, and perseverance. 1. Afternoon, as she was practicing a new piece, a group of students gathered nearby, watching silently. They had questions, but they also had admiration. They whispered among themselves, sharing what they had learned from observing her. She did not stop or acknowledge them directly. She simply continued to play, letting her fingers communicate the lessons she could not put into words. Each note became a message, each phrase a subtle instruction. By the time she finished, the students had absorbed more than she could have explained in any lecture. Her reputation grew not because she sought it, but because her actions spoke louder than any words. She became known as someone who could take the most difficult music and make it alive, someone whose focus and sincerity were unmatched. Yet she remained humble, never flaunting her talent, never seeking to dominate others. She let her music and her dedication define her, and in doing so, she earned the respect and admiration of everyone around her. By the end of Part 5, she had transformed not only her own path, but had subtly influenced those around her. The conservatory, once a place of rigid expectations and judgment, had begun to see the value of sincerity, patience, and heartfelt. The following weeks at the conservatory were unlike any she had experienced before. The initial astonishment of her performance had settled into a steady recognition of her talent. Students and teachers alike began to treat her with a mixture of respect and curiosity. She no longer felt the subtle weight of doubt pressing down on her shoulders. Instead, she moved through the halls with calm purpose, fully focused on her music, on learning, and on understanding the world through sound. Each morning, she arrived early, as she always had, finding a quiet practice room where she could work without interruption. The sun streamed through the tall windows, illuminating the dust motes that floated lazily in the air, creating patterns that seemed to dance with the gentle rise and fall of her playing. She practiced diligently, revisiting difficult pieces, perfecting nuanced passages, and exploring new compositions. Every key, every chord, every subtle shift in tempo became a conversation between her and the piano. She noticed the changes in her fellow students. Many of them, who had once dismissed her as ordinary, now sought her out for advice or guidance. They watched her practice with quiet reverence, trying to understand the patience and insight that allowed her to interpret even the most complex music with such clarity. Some tried to imitate her methods, slowing their own playing, listening more carefully, and focusing on the emotion behind the notes rather than merely hitting them correctly. The influence she had begun to exert was subtle but undeniable. Teachers, too, had started to treat her differently. They recognized her ability to absorb instruction quickly, to understand deeply, and to execute with both precision and feeling. Several teachers invited her to perform in small, private sessions to demonstrate techniques or to illustrate the interpretation of a particular piece. She accepted without hesitation, always focused on the music itself rather than the recognition. Her calm demeanor and unwavering dedication inspired even the most experienced students and teachers, reminding them of the fundamental purpose of music: to communicate, to feel, and to connect. One day, the head teacher called her into his office. The room was lined with shelves of scores, old books, and photographs of past performances. He gestured for her to sit. "You have changed the atmosphere of this conservatory," he said, his voice steady but imbued with genuine respect. "You have reminded both students and teachers that true mastery is not about arrogance, nor about seeking approval. It is about honesty, dedication, and a deep connection to the music. Your influence here is remarkable. She listened quietly, her hands folded in her lap. Thank you, she said simply. I only do what the music asks. He nodded, smiling faintly. There is a rare quality in your playing that cannot be taught. Technique alone is insufficient. What you possess is understanding, patience, and heart. I hope you continue to grow, because you have the potential to inspire many more than you realize. She inclined her head, feeling a quiet warmth in her chest. It was not pride that she felt, but affirmation of the path she had followed all her life years of solitary practice, careful observation, and a willingness to listen not just to music, but to herself. In the following days, invitations to perform began to arrive. Small recitals, private sessions, and opportunities to accompany other students all came with increasing frequency. She accepted each one with calm determination, never flaunting her talent, never seeking recognition. Each performance was treated as a lesson, an opportunity to explore, to express, and to connect with the audience. The halls of the conservatory echoed with her music, filling every corner with a quiet yet undeniable authority. Even students who had been initially dismissive now approached her with respect, asking questions, seeking guidance, or simply listening. She treated each encounter with humility, offering advice patiently, demonstrating techniques gently, and encouraging them to understand music rather than merely perform it. Slowly, she became a quiet leader, someone whose presence inspired dedication and focus, not through authority or assertion, but through authenticity and skill. One afternoon, she was asked to play for a visiting group of critics and composers. The hall was filled with tension, anticipation, and subtle whispers of skepticism. Many expected a display of technique, perhaps impressive, but lacking depth. She entered calmly, placed her hands on the keys, and began to play. The first notes were soft, deliberate, and expressive. The critics leaned forward, their pens poised, their ears alert. They listened, captivated not only by the technical precision of her playing, but by the honesty and emotion that flowed through. Every phrase as the piece progressed, the complexity increased. Rapid scales, intricate chords, and sudden shifts in tempo demanded skill, focus, and control. She navigated them effortlessly, allowing the music to breathe, to flow, and to communicate. The audience was silent, entirely absorbed in the sound. Her performance was not about impressing others or proving superiority. It was about conveying the essence of the music itself. And in doing so, she captivated everyone in the hall. After the performance, the applause was thunderous. Critics who had been poised to scrutinize, composers who had been skeptical, and students who had watched in awe now rose to their feet. Some approached her afterward, offering words of praise, admiration, and respect. Your playing is extraordinary. One composer said, you do not merely perform, you communicate. That is rare. She smiled gently. Thank you. I only play what I feel. The recognition did not change her. She continued her daily practice, returning to her small dormitory room to play quietly on her familiar piano. She reflected on how far she had come, not with pride, but with gratitude. She had faced doubt, ridicule, and skepticism. She had confronted challenges that many thought impossible for her, and she had done so with patience, focus, and a commitment to the truth of the music. Her life at the conservatory began to settle into a rhythm. Mornings were spent in practice and study, afternoons in observation or teaching small groups, and evenings in quiet reflection. Yet even in this rhythm, she felt a sense of growth and opportunity. Each day brought a new challenge, a new piece, or a new lesson. She embraced each one fully, not out of ambition or desire for fame, but out of a deep love for music and a commitment to understanding it completely. Students continued to come to her for guidance. They asked about phrasing, tempo, technique, and expression. She offered explanations calmly, demonstrating each concept with her playing. She emphasized listening, understanding, and patience. Slowly, she became a mentor, though she never positioned herself as one. Her influence was quiet but powerful, teaching not only music, but also the values of dedication, humility, and sincerity. Teachers began to acknowledge her contributions more openly. Some invited her to assist in classes, to provide demonstrations, or to perform for special sessions. She accepted each opportunity, not for recognition, but as a chance to contribute, to share knowledge, and to inspire others. Her presence became an example of what could be achieved through hard work, focus, and an unwavering connection to the art. One afternoon, a particularly talented student approached her privately. "I have always struggled with this piece," the student said, voice trembling slightly. "But after watching you, I feel like I can understand it, not just play it." "How do you do it?" She smiled softly. "You listen. You practice patiently. You allow the music to guide you. It is not about speed or showing off. It is about understanding, feeling, and connecting." The student nodded, inspired, realizing that mastery was not simply about talent, but about commitment and heart. Her reputation continued to grow beyond the conservatory. Invitations to perform in small concerts, private recitals, and educational sessions arrived regularly. Each performance reinforced the quiet truth she had always known, that dedication, sincerity, and understanding were more important than fame or recognition. And each time she performed, she remained humble, focusing solely on the music, letting it speak for itself. By the end of the term, the conservatory had transformed in subtle but meaningful ways. Students practiced with more focus. Teachers approached instruction with renewed patience, and the atmosphere was filled with a sense of possibility and encouragement. She had become a catalyst, not through force or assertion, but through the example of her dedication and talent. Her influence was lasting, shaping not only her own path, but the paths of those around her. One evening, she sat quietly at her dormitory piano, reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. She thought of the early mornings spent practicing, alone, the nights of doubt and frustration, and the moments of quiet triumph when she had finally mastered a difficult passage. She thought of the skepticism she had faced, the laughter she had ignored, and the teachers who had once doubted her. And she felt a deep sense of peace. She had stayed true to herself, and the music had responded in kind. Her hands moved over the keys, playing a melody she had composed herself. It was not difficult or complex, but it carried the weight of her experiences, the solitude, the perseverance, the quiet strength that had guided her. Each note was deliberate, each phrase filled with meaning. She closed her eyes, letting the music flow through her, connecting her to every challenge, every triumph, and every lesson she had learned. As the final note faded, she sat in silence, feeling the D.